The COVID-19 pandemic, it's been hard on so many levels, hasn't it? Loss of contact between families and friends, livelihoods under threat, life disrupted. But new figures suggest the pandemic's impact on people with a disability has been even more dramatic, with just over a third losing their NDIS or other support services altogether. River Knight is the Chief Executive of disability sector advocacy organisation Australian Communities and joins us this afternoon. Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
So why has this been happening to people?
All we saw with COVID is the 4 million people with disability living in Australia, which is about 18%, really experience a huge disconnect. And one in 10 of those people access services through what's called an NDIS. So what we saw is so many closures of services or restrictions on services being able to go in and support people, which has had a huge trauma and a big impact on people's mental health.
So what sort of impact, has it had on people's lives? Obviously, mental health not going so well. What else?
So if you think we've got a full gamut of supports that people with disability might have. So some people might have just that drop-in support and might get help with some tasks day to day. Then other people need that one-on-one 24-hour support in their home just to simply get through the day. So they may need support with everything from personal care, showers, meals, going out to appointments, all of those sorts of things, as well as therapies. So occupational therapy and physio and psychology, all of those things are really hard to replace with electronic media. So we can't do support via e-health apps. We need that face-to-face hands-on support for some people. And also that disconnect creates a huge issue for some people with a disability, because a lot of services had to actually stop, which created some huge hurdles for people with a disability in the community.
So obviously, some people are, as you say, some people are completely unable to do some of these physical things for themselves without that hands-on support. What are they doing? Just sitting at home by themselves?
Well, we've had a huge response from service providers needing to risk manage and work out a plan for how we can continue to support, because a lot of these services are essential services, so we simply can't stop. So if staff come into contact with COVID and have to go into quarantine, if they can't go in and support people, someone still needs to do that. And they can't just have anyone walk in the door. It needs to be someone that knows them, knows their support needs and their routines. But what we've seen is with some of those optional services where we got, community access and things, we've seen about a 30% underspend in people's funding, which doesn't roll over to the next year. So we've got a lot of people worried now that this year, once COVID settles, am I going to have to try and make a case to get the funding that I had last year? Because I'm hearing these stories of people saying, you know what, you didn't use that funding last year. Maybe you don't really need it, which would be a real shame if it does happen, because I've already been in NDIS meetings where I've said, you know what, remember that thing called COVID? That's why that funding wasn't used. It's not that we don't need it. It's actually because the person physically couldn't go to the community and use those services.
Do you think that is a scenario that is likely to happen, that people will lose it because they didn't use it?
The current system is use it or lose it. So when the new plan starts for a person, because the funding tends to be 12 months at a time, when it starts, you don't keep the funding from last year that you didn't use. So it doesn't roll over, and you have to make a case. So I think NDIS are going to do a really good job of being flexible and sensible and understanding. But on the ground, I have already been in NDIS meetings where an NDIS planner has said to someone, you didn't use that funding. I don't think there's evidence that you need that service. And I've had to say, you know what, we need to talk about the reality of what COVID's done to that population, and that's not a fair thing. And I've had to, broker that conversation with families when they're seeing red. So I think that the policy's there, but on the ground, we just got to make sure that people still have the services that they need in 2021.
You're on ABC Radio Queensland this afternoon, and we're joined by River Knight, the Chief Executive of disability sector advocacy organisation Australian Communities. Now, Queensland has been fairly lucky, it's fair to say, in how hard it's been hit by the pandemic. Does that mean that people with disabilities in Queensland are less likely to have faced that kind of service disruption?
Well, we've seen a service disruption all around Australia at similar rates. So the timing's been a little bit different for different states. Queensland was very good at going into restrictions and lockdowns early and keeping a lid on that. But we've seen it in Queensland, and it has been experienced by pretty much everyone in the disability sector. And in Queensland, of course, the response was just a little bit sooner. And you know what, we work a lot in Queensland as Australian communities, and we saw that lockdown happen here in Queensland. I think we were recovering a lot when the other lockdowns in other states happened, which was interesting to watch, but it was the same issue all around the country.
Mm. And, we mentioned that person-to-person services being quite difficult when it comes to a pandemic. And were there solutions to finding the right people, or did people just miss out on services?
There was around 100,000 people, I guess, have reported being disconnected from some of those essential support services using the NDIS and the sector market survey data that comes across, which is quite a lot. And the reality is that some people really did get stuck at home and got marginalised even further, which is a big impact on someone if you have a disability as well as a mental illness. So day programs, work programs, anything where the people going out having contact with their peers and being able to get that support, having contact with their family, all of those sorts of things were cut off, which we understand why it happened, but there needs to be an awareness of, well, how do we work on that long road to get people back connected with the community and connected with service providers. And that's why we've started doing the big expo that we're running in May in this year at Southbank.
All right, tell us a little about that.
So we've got rid of the normal expo model, which is having the exhibition where you go to the table, get your pamphlet, and then go back home and call a lot of services. So we've got a really big interactive expo coming up. So we've got up to about 200 service providers. People will be able to go into that space. We've also got meeting spaces and connection spaces, and also a free information service where people can come with any question about NDIS, ask away. We'll have experts there to answer those questions, and then we can explain to people how the system works, and they can book in seeing 5 or 6 of the same type of service provider on the same day, and then work out, well, who's a good fit for me.
All right. Well, just going back to the pandemic situation for a moment, what if anything has the government done to try to deal with the issues around NDIS and getting that disability support for people?
We didn't see a lot in the way of practical initiatives from the government, but they did certainly help coordinate service providers understanding what was available. So, we had the health department being able to give us access to personal protective equipment that we couldn't get because there was the impulse buying at the shops. We had NDIS being able to provide some advanced payments for some service providers to have a little bit more of a cash flow to help manage that situation, although that started having to be repaid back to the government in October, which was still already, having issues with COVID, so I'm not quite sure we needed to pay that back so soon. But there wasn't a lot in the way. It was very much a sector where we needed to cope, and even with the job keeper scheme, it was only once you had those difficulties that you're accessing that. So there wasn't really a lot in the way of concrete support for service providers to put all that extra time into managing that service, just in case someone did end up, contracting COVID or having staff that couldn't go and support them. So there wasn't a lot, but there was a lot of innovation within the service, and the service provider community did a really good job, I think, supporting each other.
And just before I let you go, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I think what I'd really love to see is that underspend in the budget. When we're looking at $4 billion a quarter, if we're looking at underspending of around 30% in people's plans, I would really like to see some good projects that could be funded to help service providers as they continue to, get back into the swing of things, but also, topping up people's funding so that the people that I've got to put extra hours into helping them feel safe to get back into their community, it'd be nice to be able to access some extra funding to be able to provide that additional service just to get things moving.
All right. River Knight, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, the Chief Executive of Disability Sector Advocacy Organisation Australian Communities.
ABC Traffic.
Hey Brad, how's the roads looking?